What's up? Silas here, and I'm back with my friend Steven for Dishing on Dish. This is going to be a bit different from the ones that we normally do, as we're doing a bit of a. It might just be the same because we're doing a bit of a side, but there's a longer thing with this. So, Steven, just tell what we're going to be talking about today.
So today we're going to be discussing castello. Now, Silas and I have been working on a presentation with our mutual friend Andrea. We're part way into that, but of course we're not done, and we still have a ways to go. So Silas and I decided, let's just do a video covering the recent cheese plate I had, as well as some recipes from their book, which I thought were very interesting. We could talk a bit about this specific cheese plate and wine, but also some recipes that really stood out, as well as their philosophy behind pairings, what pairs with what, why, and those similar topics.
Yeah, and cheese is something that both of us really enjoy a lot, and all good people in the world enjoy it, unless they're like lactose intolerant, and that just kind of sucks. But they would enjoy it if they could have it, and some people still just risk the intolerance to still enjoy the cheesy goodness. And with this is a particular restaurant that Stephen had mentioned while it was still closed due to the pestilence, and then it's reopened. And he's been back a few times, and that's why we decided we'll actually do a longer, more traditional Dishing on Dish series where we just talk about the different dishes, going through mostly things that he's been over a certain amount of time. Now, we've also mentioned doing shorter ones in that series where it's like, okay, just one meal that we talk about. So here it's just one time that he went in specific, and we're going to talk about that. And then in addition, there's a cookbook from this place, as we normally talk about this when we're talking about the Dishing on Dish series. We say, okay, this restaurant that you've been to, is there a cookbook? And in this case, it actually was a cookbook. Stephen got a signed cookbook from castello, and he's going to just tell us a bit about that. So this is kind of expanding now on this Dishing on Dish series, where we'll be trying to do these ones on maybe one dish, and then talk about the cookbooks, and then sometimes even go further and actually try attempting some of the things that are actually made from the actual cookbook. Now with castello, if you want to listen to more about that, there should be links somewhere here, around here, where you're listening to this, to the rest of the series. So you'll find the one where we have a longer talk and talk more about the restaurant and things. But it's just up the street from where Stephen lives in New York City. You can just tell us maybe just a short little something about how you first found it, and how you found it now that it's reopened again after the pestilence.
Sure. So I think the way I first found out about it, I want to say I was working at Eddie and the Wolf, which was my third job in the city. And I remember one of the managers was saying that there's a place I like by you a lot. It's called castello. It's this cheese-based place. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Let me check this out. So I first went there. This was probably like 2011, 2012, something. I don't remember exactly the first time, but I checked it out and I thought it was very interesting because they had all these small plates, which I thought were fairly elaborate. Like they had like popcorn flavored with dill. They had a charcuterie board. They had some very interesting desserts. The desserts now haven't been as interesting, but in fairness to them, they reopened, so that makes sense. I actually found, I don't know if you saw, I posted, they had a pumpkin cheesecake cannoli with caramel sauce. I took a photo and posted it, and they actually reshared my photo. I thought that was kind of cool. So I thought, okay, it's cool. They have not just cheeses, but they have a series of rotating cheeses, plus they have a condiment which pairs with each one. And the cheese as well as the condiments change regularly, and there's a philosophy behind why they do what they do. And I just thought that was very interesting. I mean, there's nothing quite like this in the city, at least from what I've seen anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and with this You Are What You Consume series, it's part in the grander series. It's just about things that you eat and the things that make up the food that we eat, the proteins, fats, and carbohydrates that build the physical bodies of the animals and creatures that eat it, from the plants and things like that, converting the soil and minerals into actual wood and into fruits, into flowers, into converting the carbon dioxide to oxygen. Just these processes, anything to do with that whole process of consuming things, in eating, ingesting things, and what comes from that, and then now going dish and dishes specifically with the food. So this is kind of both of those kind of things. Now we're talking about this in specific. What is the actual, like you said, the reasoning behind the cheese? Because most people do really enjoy cheese. I think most people who do enjoy cheese, it's mostly just cheese by itself, where you have like mozzarella with some prosciutto, and there's certain ways where like mozzarella prosciutto with the balsamic vinegar, and then you put like some fresh ground peppers, peppercorns, and things like that. That could be one way to do it, but I think in most cases, people just like cheese as cheese, or cheese and grilled cheese, where it's in something. But this one, I think, was something rather interesting to see, that pairing of the actual cheese with something else made specifically to go along with the cheese. Whereas I think cheese is normally thought of by itself or as some kind of addition to a meal already. So this one, just having a place that just highlights the cheese, is a rather unique idea. And we've talked about this. We'll talk about it more in the actual one we're recording, where we're talking more details about the food. But this is something that I can imagine being catching on and spreading all around the world, like being like a franchise type of thing. But right now, from all we know, it's just this one location. And as we mentioned, we can get into more on that if you check out that other longer conversation that we have about it. Anything else you kind of want to say about just this idea and things like that?
Yeah, so here's a copy of the book for those who haven't seen it. Pairing the cheese plate. Yep. And then here's a part. There's a section on on how and why they pair what they do. I'll just read from this. I think it was very creative. The rule of there are no rules. Although we say a lot of things in this book that sound like commands or rules, we actually believe there are no rules. Okay, this might be a slight exaggeration because there are a few rules. Never pair a cheese with Skittles or any other accompaniment that is so strong or sweet that you can't taste the cheese. Never eat spinach that has been recalled by the FDA. Never go up against a Sicilian when death is on the line. For the most part, though, almost everything we talk about in the cheese world is subjective. There are no right or wrong pairings for particular cheeses. We love tomato caraway chutney with Chevrolet, and you may hate it. We may think Cabernet Sauvignon overwhelms most cheeses, but you may feel that if a cheese is wrong with Cabernet Sauvignon, then you don't want to be right. Our idea of too sweet may be your idea of perfect. There may be behaviors that are more broadly accepted or issues on which there is broad consensus, but if you disagree with the consensus, then bully for you. The only criterion that matters at the end of the day is, do you and your guests like it? As you read this book and notice when we say this goes with that, or some accompaniment will have some particular effect on such and such a cheese, remember that these are just recommendations and opinions. We know what you're thinking. Go ahead, send us your cheese and Skittles pairing suggestion. As we wrote that sentence, we knew that that's what we were in for.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's this plate, like as you mentioned, what we talked about specifically this time is a plate and a pairing that Stephen chose by himself, because they normally have something where it's kind of like I'm forgetting what the thing is, the omakase, where you go to a Japanese restaurant and the chef kind of gives you their small plates, but they decide what kind of sushi and sashimi and onigiri, and is onigiri something separate? Yeah, it's the different kind of dishes and plates. They give you these small tastings, and it's normally like 5 or 6 different things that they give you in that sense. And as Stephen mentioned, they have one where it's like kind of a chef's omakase, a cheese omakase in that kind of sense, where they normally have a rotating one. Do they switch every week, or is it every month, or how seasonal is the switching on the regular plate that comes out?
So what you're referring to is called the fromager selection, and they give you 6 pieces for the price of 5. So you get bonus. It's usually $8 a piece, so save a little money. But the thing is, it's up to them to choose. So you may get things you want, you may get things you don't. That's kind of the risk you take. But if you're open to trying things, what happened was when I went by myself, then with Andrea, each time I did the fromager selection. But most of the cheeses were pretty similar. So then, since I went, I picked my own because I didn't want to just keep getting the same stuff. What I found is, the cheeses, it seems like they have different stuff, because I've looked at the menu even like a few weeks apart, and there have been some different things on it. But I think it's a combination of what's available, what they're getting good deals on, all this. But I think what it is they have cheeses of a certain variety. They just change out the brands or they tweak them slightly. So like they're always like 1 or 2 blues, but like it might be a Stilton one week, it might be a roquefort another. There might be different bries, but like this one's made in Ireland this week, this one's made from Paris. There are little things like that. But like, and they talk about this in the book here too, that they try to include all these certain categories. It's just what those like those specific cheeses in those categories change. It relates to what we said about the 4 C's of dessert: chocolate, caramel, citrus, and coffee. You should have at least one of those things, but what those actual desserts are, that can change all the time with season and what you feel like doing and what's popular, etc.
So it couldn't be a day-to-day thing, but you said it's still the same kind, but not the same type. So the type might change even on a daily basis, but the kind normally stays the same. And you have that also kind of idea that you'd mentioned, where it goes from a more lighter cheese all the way to the stronger tasting ones from left to right. That's how they plate it on the fromagers. Fromagers, what was it again?
Fromager's selection, or
Fromager's
choice
selection. Yeah. So on that one, that's the one that it goes through that. But Now I think we should just jump into the one that you actually got. There will be a video. I don't know when we'll play the video. I might play the video now if we're not, because it has the waitress is actually explaining what it is. And
Mm-hmm.
you recorded it vertical, and we're going to put a ban on your vertical videos. You got to put that camera on the side. But I think we'll have that video, but there'll also be an image of it. And I think the way we'll do it, our faces are going to go off the screen now, and then we'll just have a list. I'll read out all the cheeses, and then
Mm-hmm.
we'll go back in, and Stephen will tell us what these cheeses are, and we'll just have a discussion of that. And then after that, we'll talk about some of the things out of the recipe book, because the cookbook. Because I was also thinking like, oh, when I first heard he got a cookbook, I was like, but I thought it was a cheese place. But then yeah, once you think about the sides of it, and as Stephen mentioned, they go into more of the philosophy and the reasoning behind some of these things, the different wine pairings, the different kind of condiments that you can make. And with us, condiments are a big thing because you don't have to just use this with cheese. Now, when you learn how to make these condiments, you can also think, oh, this worked with this cheese. Now let me try it on all these other things. Like I'm sure that a lot of these things you probably do, like as wing dressings or dips or other things, or just little side dishes to go along with like chicken tendies or something like that. Like you can also use these for other things. So yeah. Okay. So just starting with the cheese plate, and this is from left to right. First one is Obanan, which is, oh no, one question though. With this one, did you also use that same thing? And yeah, it seems like you used some of that thing in mind of going from lighter to something stronger.
Well,
Did you have that in mind when you were picking this?
Well, sort of, because the way the cheese list is written, it's laid out in that order too. So like the one I have at first would be towards the top, and then the blue is like the last one. But I think when they played it for you, they do it that way automatically because the idea is you're supposed to work up the intensity. Like
Okay.
if you do with wine pairings, it's a similar thing. Like they recommend starting lighter and going to heavier, because if you have a heavy wine and then you have a light, it'll taste weaker by comparison. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
so even if you order it a
Yeah.
different way, they'll plate it for you this. Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting. That's a good thing. That's a good thing for them to just keep that
Yeah.
whole philosophy of their restaurant
Yeah.
in there because they kind of know the dish. Yeah. Okay. So cheese plate from left to right. The first one is O'Bannon, which is a Capriole Dairy, Greenville. Sorry, O'Bannon, which is from Capriole Dairy in Greenville, Indiana, which is
Yep.
pasteurized goat wrapped in a bourbon chestnut leaves, paired with apple butter and almond crunch.
Yep.
Okay. The next one is ewereka. Now I'm thinking that's like the ewe, the sheep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I haven't
Yeah.
gotten to that. That's interesting. That means a good name to talk about the female sheep. Yeah. What's the male sheep called?
I think it's a ram.
Okay. Yes. It is
Yeah.
a ram.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rams. Yeah. All right. Central Coast Creamery, which is in Paso Robles, California. This is pasteurized sheep, carrot and cumin puree with edible cornflower. And the cheese has toffee notes. Now, something like this, you see the way they're finding it from different places. This is the kind of thing where we have a different series of I Know Great People, and we had one with Mark Kibler, and he has a family farm, and he's talking about making his own cheese. It seems to be like they could actually be working with rather small cheese like producers, as long as your thing is good. Now I'm wondering how they find the people who are supplying them with cheese and things like that. That would be do they mention that in the cookbook at all?
I mean, I haven't read the book from cover to cover, so I'm not
Okay.
sure. I'm sure there probably is something about that. Like, to make a comparison, if you read the French Laundry Cookbook, Thomas Keller actually gives a shout out to his different purveyors, and he explains like, this is a farm in California that has the best lamb I've tasted, so we regularly get our lamb in springtime from them, and like
Okay.
it's kind of cool because it gives them a shout out, so that if people want to buy their stuff, they can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like one thing I'm wondering. Like we have some of these that we're listing here. There's definitely some. It's an extensive list. It's over 100 cheeses. It's like 150 cheeses.
Hmm.
So there's some cheeses I hadn't heard of before. Some like brand new, and they list the location. So
Hmm.
you can also try to contact these people yourselves, and you might be able to get some of these cheeses yourself if you're not in the New York City area. Okay, next one. Finger Lakes Gold, which is from Lively Run, Interlaken, New York. It's pasteurized goat paired with cashew brittle. And, here, the next one is a canestrato from Castelcivita, Italy. And it's a raw sheep paired with the oven roasted tomatoes. Interesting. Okay. Oh. And then the next one was a complimentary piece because Stephen is becoming It's becoming a guy well known in several places. So they have the regulars there. It's a zimbro from Serra da Estrela, Portugal, which is raw sheep paired with pickled beet and beet dust. Okay, now here we're talking about the dust. I remember those different ones we've talked about. There's dust, there's crisps, there's foam, there's like gels, different things you can do by breaking down the same kind of fruit or vegetable or meat or element, and then you have that same taste, but with a different mouthfeel, different texture, and it gets to your body and your system in a different way. So that's interesting they're doing that. And the last one here was a stilton from Melon Mowbray, England. It's pasteurized cow, and it was paired with a chocolate-guinness ganache. Interesting. Chocolate-guinness ganache.
Mm-hmm.
That would be actually interesting, yeah. Huh. Okay, yeah, so let's go back to the start with the Albano and Capriola from the Capriola Dairy in Grenville, Indiana. Tell us a bit about this and the pairing.
Sure. So this is very similar to a chev for those who are familiar. What's interesting is they actually take chestnut leaves and they actually soak them in Woodford Reserve bourbon and they wrap the cheese in that. So that actually imparts some flavor in the cheese itself. Because the thing is, a lot of goat cheeses are just very bland, like they don't really taste like much of anything. But the idea is because it has this flavor, this impacts the flavor. And I think I talked about in a previous discussion, Chef Angie Marr, she used to run Beatrice Inn. She has a new place now. She has steaks that are actually wrapped in cloth soaked in whiskey as well. So like I think that's becoming a more common thing, and it imparts the flavor, and you actually taste some of the tannins from the whiskey as well as some of the sort of caramel elements from all this. I'll have to tell my friend Matt Murphy about this because Woodford Reserve is actually his favorite, so I think he'd find that interesting. But it is a milder cheese, like I say, paired with apple butter. I think most people know that as almond crunch. That's the lighter cheese that you start with. So it's, it has more flavor than a lot of chefs, but at the same time, it is milder compared to these others. Yep.
Okay, now here, so the actual chestnut leaves is like fresh chestnut leaves? Oh, sorry, fresh chestnut leaves? Like,
As far
what does
as
that mean?
as far as I know, I think it's the fresh chestnut leaves because I think once they're dry, they probably wouldn't wrap as well. So you take the leaves, you soak them in the Woodford Reserve, and then just they probably like tie them up with string or something so it holds. That'd be my
Okay,
guess.
let me
Yeah.
just check. Chestnut leaves. I'm just trying to check the image so I can put those on screen to see, because I'm wondering the size of them. Would they have to like have a, okay, yeah, it's a full on, yeah, it seems like a full on tree leaf type of thing. Yeah, that's the thing, like some nuts, I guess most nuts actually do grow on trees now that I think about it. Yeah, most nuts do grow on trees. So it seems to be, yeah, regular size leaf. So you don't need like, I don't know why, maybe because the nuts are small. Sometimes I lean towards thinking it's like a little small plant, so it might be like little tiny leaves. But even like a bean pod, the smaller plant can have some rather large leaves, so you can make something with that. Yeah, okay. And what appealed to you about this when you were going through the list?
Well, the chestnut
Mhm.
bourbon thing sounded interesting to me. I hadn't
Okay.
had cheese made like that, so I thought, see how this compares. Yeah.
Uh, yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Um, do you remember the taste enough to rank these or do you want to rank it at the end to say which was your best ones from?
I feel like it's almost hard to compare in a way. Like I would almost rather compare these to similar cheeses of the same type because the problem is it's like blue versus chev, like these are completely different cheeses, so it's like different flavor profiles, different intensity each pair. So it's like I don't know, I have trouble. It'd be like sort of like comparing like let's say like a burger to filet mignon to ribeye. Like you could get a really good burger made with from really good meat. That would be better than like an overcooked like filet mignon. But then like filet mignon on its own, like it's good, but then people can mess that up. But then ribeye can be nice too. But ribeye could also be overdone. So it's like but then there could be ribeye with a different preparation. So I don't know. It's like it's almost I feel better comparing each one to similar things rather than
How about instead of the comparing the cheeses, comparing the pairings? Because you picked the pairings, right? You're the one who was like, okay, I want
oh
this to go with this.
the condiments. No, they do that for you. It's just
Okay, so even
the
in this
con
situation, you just pick the cheeses this time, and then they tell you it's once you pick a cheese, a condiment. Because I thought like you picked up the cheese and the condiments. It was just the cheese, right?
Because the idea is that they you just tell them the cheeses you want, then they bring out the plate with this, and then the
Okay.
condiments. It's like unless you have an allergy, they pretty much just do what like they think is right. Because this is
Okay.
kind of what you were saying about omakase. I'll leave it up to you. Essentially, that's the case with the condiments. Like it's like you're trusting them to take you through like their idea of what pairs well with what. Oh
Okay. So now is are the no, I don't remember the menu. The condiments are not listed on the menu, right? It's just
no,
the cheese menu. Then
yeah,
so these condiments, like the next time you go and order this, you can order the same thing. The condiments could be entirely different.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, we probably went to anywhere I came in. Okay. So now we can move on to the Eureka.
Yep.
Eureka from Central Coast Creamery of Paso Robles, California.
Paso Robles. But yeah, so this was it. The carrot cumin puree I actually had here before. Carrot and cumin is a common pairing at Barbaloo. We had a dish like that too. We had these carrots cooked with actually orange juice, cumin, and butter. It was really nice. So then there's that, I guess, pureed. Well, there's no butter in this one. And then the cornflower. The cornflower doesn't taste like much. I think it's more garnish. This cheese was good. It almost reminds me a little bit of like a Gouda, or as our friend Kyra would say, Howda. Like it's kind of like in terms of texture, like it's kind of crumbly. Um, it's interesting though, because sheep cheese versus sheep milk versus cow, it's like there's definitely a difference in flavor. Like it's like funkier or something. So there is a bit of that. And like I say here, it has toffee notes, and the toffee, that's a common thing you find in Gouda. So it's like it almost reminds me a little bit of that. And that paired well. It was interesting with the carrot, but you also get the spice of the cumin. Cumin's a very strong spice, so I feel like it only pairs well with certain things. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is very strong.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, these are the actual flowers. It's not flower like FLOUR. It's the actual flower petals.
Yeah.
And with a howdah, it's like with the howdah as well. There's several different kinds of cheeses because
Yeah.
it's an area in Holland called howdah, and
Yep.
that's where that the typical. I think one of the most like it because Edamer cheese is also made in howdah, but that's stuff that's more common. And um, I don't know because I was looking it up because I'm editing the actual I know great people talk that we had with her about her group Viola, and I was looking into some things in Holland. There's like four. I think there was like four major regions that produce cheese from there. And this
Yep.
is the thing with some of these countries. It's like you forget again how kind of relatively small these countries are when it comes
Yeah.
to things. Like some of these European countries that have long histories and massive names on the public stage. It's like oh, it's like 8 million people live there. You're like what?
Uh,
It's like all that from 8 million people. But yeah, it's the kind of thing that you see there. So when you hear it's like oh it's like four regions, it's like Rhode Island. But yeah,
yeah.
so but to produce all that good cheesy goodness is from that place. Okay, so here with the cumin puree now, the carrot and cumin puree. Now this is another thing like the puree. There's many things you can puree that, but people probably just do like mashed potatoes, and that's pretty much all they've had. But
Uh,
many different things you could probably do with this puree kind of thing. And then I'm thinking of like a cumin. Oh no, cumin is different because sometimes I think of turmeric is the one that's really orange. Cumin, trying to recall, yeah, it's not that orange. It's more like a yellowish type of brownish.
it's a brown seed. If you get like those taco spice blends, it's usually in that. It's a very pronounced flavor. I mean, if you taste it, I'm sure you'd recognize it right away. I'm not sure how to describe it off the top of my head, but it's a very distinct flavor. Like you see it a lot in Central South American cooking. I think you see it in some Middle Eastern stuff too. But like I say, it's a potent flavor. That's why when you see things paired with it, it's kind of interesting because it only works well with certain things, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
I'm thinking with the puree, we want to, yeah, because the puree, because the carrot is going to be a bit sweeter. Now, is this a room temperature puree? Like, is it
Yeah,
warmed up?
yeah, and by the texture of it too, I would say that there's no butter in this because if you put butter in the purees, they get very smooth and shinier. This is smooth, but like it doesn't have that like sheen about it that like something with butter would have. But this is likely just probably straight carrots. I don't know, maybe the spice, maybe some water or something, and then it's just like it's served at like room temperature, as you say. Yeah.
Seems like the kind of place if there was something else in there, they would kind of mention it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we can move on to the next one.
Sure.
Finger Lakes Gold of Lively Run in Interlaken, New York. So is it Finger Lakes Gold is the name, or Lively Run is Lively Run the name of the location?
So Lively Run is the name of the creamery. It's actually a place that specializes in goat dairy, which is kind of interesting. Finger Lock, and it's the Finger Lakes. It's actually a town up there, I think. So they, they're known for, I guess, like goat-based dairy. So they sell like milk, cheese, whatever. Um, so this is aged for at least 3 months. It's definitely milder. It has a natural rind. Um, like I wrote here, it's like a little tangy, a little sour. There's a hint of macadamia, so that's likely why they picked the cashew brittle, because it's kind of like nut pairing with nut in a way, if you want to look at it that way. But at the same time, there's a little bit of tanginess from the cheese, but there's sweetness in the brittle, so it's like the sweet and sour kind of thing.
Huh. Yeah, it looks a bit crumbly, or is that just the way it was
Yeah,
cut? It's a
it's a
harder
harder
cheese.
it's a harder cheese, so it's a little crumbly, like when you cut it apart. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Now with this, see, so it's a bit like a very chunky peanut butter type of thing when you're talking about the cashew brittle here. Oh no, it's
Well,
an actual brittle, so it's like the candy type of thing. So it's
yeah.
actually kind of okay. So now I'm wondering, you want to go with the harder cheese, nut and nut, then you also go with the crumblier cheese with something hard on the side. Interesting. But the cheese itself will kind of have a melting, and then also the brittle itself, since it's what do they use to make the brittle? Do you know? Is it just some sugars or some?
I've made brittle in the past. I'm trying to think. It's like you make some kind of liquid. I mean, it's sugar based. I'm trying to think. I think there's some dairy in there, and then it's like you kind of cook that in a pot on the stove. Then, like, I think you put the nuts in, then like you lay that out on a sheet tray, and then it just solidifies and gets like, it becomes a sheet, and you just break that into pieces and put it on the plate. I've made brittle in the past, but it's been a while. Oh, I forget if it came up, but in the seasonal presentation, we actually had pumpkin seed brittle, which we made like that, like simple syrup or something. I might not have included a dish with that, but it's basically just like sugar, usually dairy, some other flavorings. Then you put the nuts or seeds in, and then lay it out in a tray, and it just solidifies, and you break that into pieces. Yeah.
Oh, good, yeah. Well, that's interesting. I can imagine the cheese itself would kind of melt a bit, and then can also cover the cashew crumbliness. Interesting. I'm really bad with cheese. I had some
Uh,
powder today, but it was just like sliced. It wasn't as fancy schmancy as this. But yeah. All right.
uh,
So we can move on to the next one if you've got anything else to say about this. You know.
no, that's good.
Okay. So the next is the canestrato from Castel Civita in Italy. So tell us a bit about this one, which is going with the oven roasted tomatoes. Now this one I was thinking like, yeah, maybe this sounds like it'd be good.
So this is so like we say here, this is made from sheep milk. It can also be made from goat as well. It's definitely a harder cheese. It's kind of interesting. It's aged, they say, a minimum of let's see, I'm trying to think how much it's definitely aged at least 60 days, they say. So it's like, it definitely takes, that's how it takes on that harder shape. Um, it has some very more complex flavors. Like I wrote in the notes here, this particular one, you actually do get like some of the like olive, lemon, some other things. Like it's a combination of the fact that it's raw, so the bacteria causes the flavor to change. But then it solidifies, the flavors concentrate. So I think that's why they picked the tomatoes, because you figure olives, lemon, tomatoes. I mean, a lot of people think of Italian food. Those are things that come to mind. So I think it works well with that. The tomatoes have a little bit of salt and a bit of pepper on them. So you mostly just taste the tomato. I think a little bit of olive oil too, based on the texture. But they pair well because you figure tomatoes also have a little bit of acidity. So that complements the fattiness of the cheese too. Yep.
Now here with the, can you age all cheeses?
I mean, I think it's sort of like with wine, like they talk about how like the majority of wines are best drank young, but like the fine wines, certain wines are better aged. I think with cheese, it's a certain thing. Because the issue, as we mentioned before, is that in the U.S., because of rules with pasteurization and all that, like if you get them raw, they have to be consumed within a certain time. And there is risk overall of like bacteria and things developing, but it's just a question of how they're handled. Um, but I think like with wines, it's like a lot of these, like the majority of wines are best drank young. Like I think it's a similar thing with cheeses, where a lot of cheeses are best eaten within a certain time frame. Like if you were to age the cheese for like a year, it wouldn't get better. Whereas like
Yeah.
some of these wines, or another comparison might be like balsamico or whiskey, like those get better over time. Like like if you have a whiskey that's 16 years versus 8 years, the 16 years is going to be better most likely. But it's like the cheese, like that'll only go to a point.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing with this kind of class of fermented aged type of foods, because normally part of what you're eating from the actual food that you're eating is the life force of it. Like as close as you are to the actual life force. Like if you
Yeah.
just went and like you jumped on a cow and started biting chunks out of it, you get like direct life force from that cow. You just have like the raw like tartar type of thing, like a fresh thing. So some things like yeah, get if you get that fruit plucked directly off the tree. This is my again. This might sound like some woo spiritual type of thing, but I just do imagine that fruit directly from the tree has some more life energy in it than
Mm.
that same fruit if it was taken to some sort of packaging plant and then it was like done the pasteurization process, kind of frozen in time to not ripen anymore, and then you bought it from a store like a month later or weeks later, whatever. I think some of that life force will be taken from it. Now, what that life force in particular is, I don't necessarily know what that is, but I do think there's something in there, and I might look it up, might not.
Well, I
I
was
think
gonna
there's
say,
something to be said about that. Yeah.
in the case of cheese, these raw cheeses, that's literally true because you figure there's bacteria in the cheeses. There's like the probiotics and the healthy bacteria. It's just the concern is, the whole point of pasteurization, obviously, to kill that bacteria, but that bacteria also contributes to the flavor. But that was my point about you only age it so much because if you were to age it for like these cheese for a year, you'd get to a pile of mold and then the thing would just disintegrate because the
Yeah.
bacteria would just consume whatever's there and that's it. Whereas if you have it within that time frame, it ferments, it develops a flavor to a point, and then you eat it and it's good. But it's also, as long as it's been handled properly, you won't get sick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So next one.
Sure.
All right. So now we're going to the complimentary piece of some zimbro from Serra da Estrela in Portugal. Portugal. Do you say Portugal or Portugal? It's like
I
gal,
say por- I
gal.
say I say por- I say Portugal, but that's probably my ugly American coming through.
Okay. Porto. That's the port. What is it? Porto. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
but Serra de Estrela. They've gone to different languages. You got the Spanish over there, then you have the Interlaken. Is that like Dutch? What would that be?
That's a good question, actually. It wouldn't
You
surprise
have
me.
Italian here with the Castello Civita, and then you have the English. The King's English, Mowbray,
Mm-mm.
Malton Mowbray. Okay, yeah. So tell us about the Zimbro.
Sure, this was actually a very interesting cheese. I was happy they sent it to me. It's definitely like I say because it's raw sheep. You can imagine it's a little funky. It's a little sour. There is kind of a like as I wrote in the notes here. There's a little bit of a fruity element to it. Very very complex flavored cheese. It was very interesting. Very soft. I'm trying to think of what to compare it to. Um,
It almost looks like a little scoop of ice cream there or something. It's like interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what cheese I'd compare it to. Maybe it'll come to me over time, but it was definitely a funky, more intense flavor. And but it is still creamy to a degree. So with the pickled beets, you get some of the acidity because there's vinegar in the beets, and then the beet dust. The beet dust, I think, is more decoration than flavor. The way they probably make this is they probably dehydrate beets, and then once they get really dry, you grind them into powder and you just sprinkle it on top. Like I say, it doesn't taste much. It's more for presentation, but it looks cool. So.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Because how do they? What other different color of beets are there?
I mean, I think of golden purple. There's also candy cane beets that have we could maybe put up a picture of that. I don't know if you're familiar. They're white, but they have the stripes going through. The only thing that kind of sucks with candy cane beets though is that when you cook them, the colors bleed together, so they lose that appearance.
Aw. Yeah.
That's yeah. But like I wish there was some maybe there's
Oh, they
something you
look
can do
really
with
cool
sous.
though.
Yeah, maybe there's something you can do with sous vide cooking. I don't know, but it just kind of annoys me because it's like you can't like it'd be cool if there was some way to like keep those circles like while it's roasted. But again, you roast it, the colors just bleed together. So you know,
Yeah, they look
I don't
really
know.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I hadn't seen the golden beets before, so that was when I was like, oh, what is this? What?
Yeah,
It's
a
quite
lot of
cool.
people do the gold and red pairing. Felidia, my last job, maybe we'll do a presentation on them. We had a beet salad that had the red and gold paired together. Yeah.
Okay. So it's
Thomas
kind of
Keller,
like
Thomas Keller,
go
I
ahead.
think has a recipe. He has a beet salad done like that too. Yeah.
I wonder what is it that what selects certain colors in these things? It has to do with the minerals and the elements that are being made into it. Because I'm trying to think, like also like sweet potatoes, they have some sweet potatoes that could lean more towards the purplish type of thing than they have the ones that lean more to like the bright yellow type of things. And Yeah, so I don't know if there's something with roots in particular that go to these two different ones. And of course, you have things like the turmeric, the gingers. With gingers, they have like the whiter, paler ginger that you find in the United States of America more often. But then there's also a very deep yellowish ginger that you find here. I haven't found a red. Trying to think, any of y'all out there, or you, Stephen, can you think of any other things that have like that red and gold kind of?
Well, because I know there's different pigments. I'm trying to remember. There's what is it like? Because chlorophyll, of course, what makes something green. And I think with beets, it's is it betadine? I think is the pigment in beets. So, but then I'm
Okay.
wondering. But what I'm wondering is why do some beets have the betadine and others don't? So I don't
Yeah.
know if that's what I'm wondering is like, does it have to do with like what the beet like consumes as it's growing, or how is that? Because like I know with the green versus the white asparagus is grown in the dark, so there's no chlorophyll from the sun. So like we know where that comes from. But then with the gold versus purple beets, again, I don't know, and I don't know like what goes into that. But they've also said that the nutritional content varies based on pigment too. So like beets are nutritious in certain things. Then like red cabbage has a different pigment which has another nutrition. So yeah, I guess it has to do with like what it consumes, what's in the soil. I'm not 100%. Something to look into for sure though. Yeah.
It's cool. It also goes all the way up into the actual stalks of the plant because something that I found rather recently is where I switch out like Swiss chard or collard greens. Like one of my favorite kind of greens right now are the greens from the beetroot. People normally eat just the beetroot, but I like just chop them and you just make anything steamed up or sautéed or fried. It's really good. But then even the beets themselves, the leaves, will still have that red color coming after it. So I'm not wondering, is the gold also such a strong dye from the beetroot? Do you know what when you were preparing them with Felidia? No, it wasn't Felidia. It was what did you say?
What I said was that Felidia, there's a beet salad that had the red and golden beets on it. I didn't prepare it myself, but I think what they did there was you roast them separately because the color will bleed out. But then you cut them into pieces. You keep the pieces separate, and then you put them on the plate together. Because the color bleeds out a bit when they cook, they won't bleed
So
together
the
on the
gold
plate.
still had the strong color coming out of it, just gold.
Right, but what I was saying was that the candy cane beets, which I prepared in other places, some places I work, they actually cut them, they served them raw, but you have to slice them super thin. So
Yeah,
like, I'm not crazy about raw beets. My father likes raw beets; it just doesn't appeal to me. But you have to
yeah,
serve
not
them.
so
You have
much.
to. Well, nutrition wise, I'm sure they're very good for you, but you have to cut it super thin because you're like chewing into like a hard apple basically. But
Yeah.
the thing with the candy cane beets is that if you roast them, like I say, the color bleeds. Like you may see some outline of it, but you're not going to see like the pronounced white and red stripes, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, so that's just what I was saying. Like even with the gold, like that's still the color, the strong dye color from it is something that goes across the board. Whether it's gold, whether it's the candy cane, or of course the red, which is more commonly known to most folks. But yeah, that's interesting. So this looks like almost like he's scooping out the interior of like some really soft brie or some camembert or something. Like is that the
Yeah,
kind
the
of
common bear would be a
consistency?
good comparison. That's a good
Okay.
comparison, like texture wise. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, and become a that little bowly guy,
Yeah.
little bowly guy to come out with it. Okay, so
It
I
just it
think
just occurred to me too. I don't remember if I've had Portuguese cheese before this. It's just not like I mean I've had a ton of French stuff, Italian, some German, Swiss, but I don't know that I had Portugal cheese before this. It's not something I gave much thought to. Oh.
yeah, and yeah. So with these ones, I'll try to find if I can find images of the cheeses that I'm see if I can actually get the actual zimbro of it. If I can find the actual brands of the cheeses in particular, because some of these I've been looking, there's locations online to find them. You'd be able to find them because I'm looking at Zimbro online. It's trying to use this kind of blue, weird kind of fruit thing. I don't know if that's part of the flavor or that's like the region or something, but yeah, anyway. So we can go to the next one and the last one of the actual cheese plate. Then we'll get into the recipes. So this one is now the Stilton from Melton Mowbray in England. And this is a version of blue.
Yeah, so Stilton it's like the English blue. I mean, when I think of like blue cheese in England, that's the one that usually comes to mind. Um, It's very strong. It definitely, if you compare it to like Roquefort or Gorgonzola, it's definitely a different flavor profile. Trying to think of how to describe it. I would say it's a little bit stronger than the other two that I just mentioned. That's why I usually pair it with other like very strong stuff. So like this chocolate Guinness ganache. It was dark chocolate, but also Guinness, which has some like chocolatey overtones, kind of. So it's something to sort of it's something that's sweet, but also strong, that sort of counteracts the strength of the blue. Because like this blue on its own, I think it would be too much for me. Like I would have to have it with, like, as Laura mentioned, like ice wine or like a port, or like you have to have something that's very like it's one of those things where it's like it's very strong, so you need something that's like strong but in a different way to sort of like balance it out.
Yeah. Because that's what I was saying. People might think, oh, I just need something sweet. But no, even if it is, I think if you, not just joking about the Skittles thing, I think even if you had the Skittles with this, it's not as, Skittles is this, it's this sweetness. It's not as flavorful of something to combat the different kind of, I think, levels that are working with when you're talking about blue cheese. Because yes, there's mold and bacteria and all kinds of cheeses, but with the blue cheese of having that, and Stilton, from my memory, is one of the stronger ones of the blue that's commonly found. So yeah, it's when you bite into those chunks of mold, because you all who have had blue cheese, you can know that sometimes you're having mostly cheese, and then you'll get some pockets of just like where it's like over 50% of what you're tasting at the time is the mold, or sometimes a lot higher, and it's really a kick in the mouth right there, kick in the the taste buds. So I can see the ganache kind of having a different kind of ability to it, and also the ganache now is a smoother type of thing compared to the still generally crumbly nature of those little clusters of mold in the cheese.
So if you remember when we did the presentation on Casamono, there was a chocolate ganache, but that one was a little more solid, because ganache is basically chocolate and cream, but you can do different levels of cream versus chocolate, so it can be thicker or thinner. So the one at Casa Lua was a bit thicker, so you had to like kind of like it's not as thick as a solid piece of chocolate, but closer to that. Whereas like this one was like very soft. Like this was maybe like kind of like that whipped ricotta cheese we covered in the first video. The texture is like maybe on par with that. So like this is very soft. So there's more cream, so it's softer, but also the Guinness probably lightens it up too in terms of texture. But then it's darker chocolate with the Guinness. So like I say, it's like you get that like malty, darker chocolate, but it's still somewhat sweet too.
Okay, so now let's jump to the wine that you paired this with.
Yep.
And you said, but they normally suggest the wine. So with something like this, with all these different tastes, do they just say, okay, they have somebody in the back, a sommelier or something, who has some kind of knowledge to say, okay, this wine will pair the best with 3 out of 5 of these cheeses, so we'll go with that instead? Or what's the kind of thought process behind this? Because as you mentioned, it could be a wide range of different kind of flavors and cheeses here going on.
Well, there's a section in here on how they pair drinks with cheeses. What I typically do here is I just pick a sweeter wine, like typically a port or something, and pair that with cheese, because it's like it sort of counteracts like the strength of the blue. It's not so sweet that it drowns out the milder cheese. It won't pair perfectly with each item, but it'll like work with at least enough a few of them where it's kind of worth it. Like maybe one it's sharply contrasted, another, like for example with this I talked about how it has similar to Muscat, so there's some like fruitiness but also some caramel notes, so that pairs well with like maybe like the like cheeses numbers 2, 3, and 4, but then like the sweetness sort of counteracts the blue. So I don't know, it's like it like again like you could probably customize, like you could come up with like an ideal wine for each cheese here, but they don't do that. I'd mentioned that when I ate there, but I guess that's not their thing. So
yeah, that'd also be a lot of wine, because you're having that cheese plate of 6. You have like 6 glasses of wine.
Well, in Silas, in cases like that, what they typically do, like if you do a chef's tasting, is they'll give you like an ounce or 2 of each wine. That way you don't drink that much. So you would have 12 ounces of wine. You figure a wine glass typically is like 5, so you figure that's like slightly over 2 glasses. So it's not that much. I mean, it's just you have enough to pair with each little thing, and then you move on to the next one. Yeah.
Well, maybe when you open yours, you can do it that way instead.
There we go.
Okay, so tell us about the Castello di Volpaia, or the nika, passito, zibbibo from Zibbibo, Pantelleria. Okay, let's say, okay, Castello di Volpaia, or the nika, passito, zibbibo of Pantelleria, Italy.
Sure. So this is actually, we had this wine at Netta for a bit, but I didn't get to try it because it's pricier. So this is if you go to the south of the most western tip of Sicily, closer to Africa than Europe. They call it the Black Pearl of the Mediterranean. It's the volcanic island of Pantelleria. Yeah, I'm probably butchering that. Anyone who speaks Italian, feel free to correct me. It uses the zibbibo grapes, which actually come from Egypt originally. If you notice by the spelling, they're also called Moscato d'Alessandria or Moscatellone. So that's actually similar to the in Italian, there's the wine Moscato, or in French, it's Muscat. It's the same grape, so it's like a variant on that basically. It was introduced in Sicily by the Arabs, and this they actually recommend on that island because I guess the soil there is volcanic, so that like affects the way the grapes grow, and that gives them the flavor. So you get larger berries. It has a very intense. It's sweet, but it's intense flavor. You get fruit and other things, so it's very nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about. Too. We went into it in more detail, and I know great people with Laura Miles, where she was talking about natural wines, and we got into like how the soil and how the different elements of the earth. And that's the whole art where you consume things, where it's like literally plants and things like that will change. Animals will change their flavoring just by, or the nature of the creature, the anatomy of the insides of it changes depending on what they ingest. And this is the same thing that happens to human beings. So we live in a time when some places, many of the places where you listen to this is health at every size or this and this, or it doesn't matter the quality of food. No, it does matter. Like you can't just be shoving in just processed junk and say you're just as healthy as somebody who has their family farm, like Mark was telling us about, where he's getting stuff directly. He's decided, I'm going to take away as many pesticides as possible. I'm going to do things as humanely as possible. Have the animals live a life that doesn't have stress, where they're pumping in all these different kind of hormones into their system and things like that. So it's just like as he said, which I think is a really good thing that he said, was just like when his philosophy for his animals, the animals that he husbands, that's where the term husbandry came from. It's like, was husband used before that?
That's a good question, actually. That's one of the
No, look it up. Some people might say like, oh, some
because
people
it's
like
like the whole.
that's sorry, they
Sorry,
might say it's
go.
like sexist because of like, you're saying women are property, and you said the husband is husbanding the woman. Go ahead, what were you saying?
Well, I was gonna say it's sort of like truffles. Like I tell people at truffles, they're like, "Oh, is that like chocolate truffles?" I'm like, "No, no, the chocolate truffles were based off the ones out of the ground.
Yeah.
People just want to make chocolate, and they're like, oh, it looks like these things. Okay, we'll call them truffles."
Okay, so so yeah, he said greatest thing that he said with his husband was he says he wants them to have a great life and then one bad day. All is like one bad day. That bad day is the day that they're slaughtered and things like that. And that's is a definitely different. There's a difference. And I think once y'all have actually, you can reset your palate from stop smoking so much and stop doing all these other things. And once you do that, and you actually get a nice organic is a term that's thrown around a lot that I don't necessarily like because everything's organic, even
Yeah.
chemicals are organic in a sense. It's just the different kind of quality of the food. If you actually taste something that's fresh, very simply made and as close to its original kind of nature that has been created versus something that's processed and things like that, the simulacrum that you get from it, there's a difference. Like the greatest Skittles you have is not going to be anywhere close to the greatest actual version of that fresh plant that it's trying to be like. So that's the kind of thing that I'm kind of talking about here. And that's something that you need to be in touch with. And that's why I like places like this. So I like places who go into like some thoughts between putting the things together and then having the cookbooks. And that's also why I just like this series in general that we're talking about different things. But yeah.
So if I may here, I wanted to read the section from the book where they talk about their philosophy behind pairing drinks with cheeses.
Okay.
You can go in one of two directions when pairing beverages with cheese plates, intellectual or emotional. The intellectual style involves choosing one beverage for each cheese, as we have done on page 138, where we have paired a Manzanilla sherry with feta from Spoonwood Cabin in Vermont, a Prosecco with Crémeux des Augustins, a Pinot Noir with Red Hawk from Cowgirl Creamery in Sonoma, an espresso stout with Barely Buzz from Beehive Cheese in Utah, and a sake with Rogue River Blue from Rogue Creamery in Oregon. When you pair like this, each bite and each sip is an experiment in education in taste combinations. Each pairing is a topic for you and your guest to study. You taste the cheese by itself and sip the beverage. You then taste the cheese with its condiment and consider the pairing. You nod knowingly at your tasting companions and sip the beverage again and see how the drink changes the whole combination. You take notes. For the right group of people at the time, this can be a great experience. It can be fun, intellectual, dorky, geeky, nerdy, left brain fun. Yeah. So for me, basically, for a lot of people, and in situations, however, this intellectual pairing can be too much work and seem kind of obnoxious or intimidating. That's why for most people, it makes more sense to keep it simple or emotional. So this is, they say, you, for this case, you just pick a beverage that they like, basically pair it with each thing. And then they say, like some people are just there to hang out. They don't want this kind of pairing. And then they say, for this reason, we do not normally serve flights of wine or beverage pairings at Castello. We will do so upon request, but we are rarely asked. Most white wines, sparkling wines, beers, sakes, sherry, ports, meads, and madeiras are good with a broad range of cheeses. Many red wines are good too. So relax and choose to drink something you like. Chances are it's not going to screw up your cheese plate and it will make you happy. And then they talk a bit about champagne and other sparkling wines here. Because they talk about the acidity, how that pairs well with the certain cheeses. They talk about some of the more potent white wines go well, like Gewürztraminer, which I think we talked about. Different reds maybe go on the lighter side. They talk about craft beers. They do have a few beers there, but I don't typically get them. And they say, I'm not just sort of summarizing because it's kind of long here, but then I'm going to say plenty of professionals out there will tell you that this particular beverage goes well with this cheese. They're very often right about a particular pairing, and we get as excited about these moments as anyone else. But the truth is that many different pairings work for each cheese and for each cheese platter, and what is right depends on the person doing the tasting. So you do you. Think in broad strokes to find one beverage that complements a variety of cheeses, which is how you will be eating and drinking most of the time. Think creatively when you are pairing more specifically. The only rule that matters is if you like it, it's good. So they're very subjective, certainly, kind of like with their condiments, there are certain guidelines, but again, if you can pull off something that works, I mean, go for it.
Yeah. Now, this is something we've talked about in previous talks, especially the Philadelphia talk. You talked about the massive cellar that they had. Now, a place like this with all the rotating cheeses and things like that, I'm also imagining they would have some regular wines, but then a lot of these will probably, they'll get like, okay, we're going to have 100 bottles of this, and then we'll see what we can pair it. And then once that's done, we might recoup with something else instead, where there's probably also a rotating stock of beers and whiskeys and liquors and wines, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because basically, again, it's sort of like what I was saying about the cheeses or the desserts, where it's like you try to have a few broad categories. So you'll have like a very light red, you'll have like a medium red, you'll have like a heavy red, and then that may change. Like you may get like a good deal on like a Bordeaux red, like a blend like Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, or something, and then then they may stop producing it or it may go up in price. So maybe you pick like another heavy red, like a Syrah from Côte d'Aron or something that's like a little like it's slightly different, but it's like it's comparable in turn. Like it's I know any sommelier is going to say that these are not the same wines. I get that, but I'm saying like something that's broadly in the sort of the same category. So it's like it'll work well in place of something else. Like, but then if you want to have if you're a more sophisticated place, you may have like a wider variety because people are going to come in and ask for it. But if it's a smaller place, you have a few things to sort of cover your bases because people will say like, oh, I want this, I want that. Like at Felidia, we had like 5 or 6 whites or reds by the bottle each because like you have like a few lighter, a few heavier, some are earthy, some are fruity, but it's like you cover those bases. And then if people want more in-depth stuff, they can order bottles, and bottles we had way more of. But if you're going to get a bottle and you're going to pick out a specific bottle, you're more likely to be more particular and willing to spend a little more.
Okay. Yeah, okay, it wasn't Fellini. It was Gabriel Caruso where you said where there was like it was like hundreds of wines. I'm like, where are they keeping all these things? I'm like break into this guy's cellar. Yeah. Okay, so I just checked a bit on the background of husband. So husband, so the etymology of husband, it started slang, it was circulated in Harvey. So that was 13th century. Thinking about the background of that. So husband managed thriftfully early 15th century from husband, the obsolete sense of steward, which was mid 15th century, husband, husbanding, and then from husbandry, that started circa 1300s around management of a household, late 14th century as farm management, from husband in now obsolete peasant farmer sense. So I think this goes back to the history of humans, where we live in a time where, if you listen to this, you probably live in a culture and a society where only 2% of your population is actually actively farming, and most people live to a ripe age of their 80s without ever actually having to plant or kill an animal or see an animal be born and see some life be taken directly in order for you to consume the life energy that it has possessed in its body. So that's something. And I think back in the day when you were a husband, you also to be a husband to begin with. In most of these cases, you had to be in a situation where, in order for a female to actually accept to marry, or her parents to accept you to take her hand in marriage, in many cases, you probably had to be able to manage and own a household. And that also involved having some animals and some plants and some things like that. So I think those two things kind of continued, where that's still there, even though we've gone away. It's like, oh, there's no expectations of you being a husband. I guess there's still more expectations in general in the West for what a husband needs to do in the home, whereas for the women, with like their women's rights and being out in such a society that's expanded to a wider range. There's no wife. I don't know, what would the equivalent of like wifery be? I don't know if there is an equivalent of wifery. Wifery.
We could have Andrea on and discuss these things and see.
Yes, I think it might come up. We might bring it up in the next part. But yeah, there's also some interesting history here with like the way like werewolf and like the wife. The actual term for wife wasn't necessarily. It wasn't actually dealing with women to begin with. Like the origin. This is like Weeman. It was more like with like men, women type of thing. So yeah, there's some interesting things in the background. I love etymology. I don't love it. I LUV etymology, where it's just it's something I really care about. It's going back in the history of the words and seeing how they developed and things like that.
Because when that whole joke about my harem of wives started, and my friend Mikhail said you need an alewife, and like and he gave me a time. He's like, you realize an alewife is a fish, but I'm like, that was an actual profession. Like there were women who brewed beer in large amounts, and those were known as alewives. Like Ale Ruth, there was a place, because it was controversial, because there was a place in my town called Ale Mary's, and of course like the Catholics got very offended, like this is mocking our Holy Mother, or this, and I guess they renamed it Mary's. But the thing is, like, that's what these women did. There was like Ale Beth, Ale Ruth, whatever. Like they just were known for that because they produced all this beer or ale or whatever.
Yeah. Some of these terms, they've added different kind of things. It's like even like with the wife used to just be female, and then ver, or WER, from like werewolf, that used to be male. So it was like if it was a female werewolf, it would be like a weef wolf, but that never actually came in. I think most werewolves historically were considered to be males. I don't know actually why just males. I guess the bestial nature of the male of the human species, I think, has been something there's some some truth in the amount of testosterone coursing through certain bestial humans. Okay, so I think is there another wine here? Is that's done?
No, I only included this one because it was just the one that I had with, and then I figured we could go to the recipes and pictures.
Yeah, most definitely check out the other series that we have with this one. I think this one will be published before this, and we'll might get into like some other food stuff before we post the one with the actual one. But whenever you listen to this, the other one might be up, so you can talk about, because in that one he had different kind of cheeses and also had different kinds of wines in that one. So now there's a different cheese plate that he has pictured here for the first one, and what he does with these, he sends me the document and then I kind of go over it. So some of these ones for the first time I'm reading through this. So the first version of the cheese plate that he has here, I could just do a different one where I'll just read the first one and then you tell us a little about it and we'll go through the entire thing.
Sure. Yep. So basically what this is this section talks about the 5 categories of cheeses. So what the 5 categories are from left to right on this plate. It's fresh cheese, bloomy and soft cheeses, cooked and pressed cheeses, wash rind cheeses, and blue cheeses. And if you notice the way the cheese plates we've had, the way they're presented, it's the same format. Now, they talk about, if you go through the next pages, they explain like each one of these cheeses has these elements. That's why we came up with this condiment. So this compares or this contrasts, all that. But this is just to sort of give you like a broad overview. And then they talk about like, okay, fresh cheeses, this is what this includes. Blue, this is what this includes, etc. I just included this as an example to show another example of a cheese plate they have and some recipes that I thought were kind of cool.
No, okay, so let me read the rest of them so you can get them. And then when I read them, you tell them the section that it is. So this first one was a Renaissance ricotta with husk cherry compote. What section was that?
So that would be the bloomy, and the first one would be the fresh cheese.
The fresh cheese. Okay, then the brillato sovereign with spring pea and sweet onion puree.
So that would be a bloomy and soft cheese.
Okay. Then the pecorino foglia with sun-dried tomato pesto.
So that's a cooked and pressed cheese.
And then the hooligan with spiced pear and cider reduction.
So that's a washed rind cheese.
And then the roquefort with herbes de Provence caramel corn.
Yeah, so that's just a blue cheese. I think that's self-explanatory.
Okay. Now with this one, so when you order, if you're going to choose your own, can you choose all fresh cheeses? Can you choose all blues if you wanted, or they'd be like, "Get out of here, you rapscallion."
Oh yeah, I mean, if you wanted to choose like 5 pieces of like the roquefort and that's it, you could. It's like, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but I mean, if you wanted to, you could.
Yeah.
You know, if you wanted to, you could. Like that's what I said before about how like this is why this is a place that's good to go with a bunch of people, because you could get like you could pretty much get everything, and then like each person could have like a little piece of each one, but there'd still be enough to go around. So you could try all the things. Whereas with me, if I come on my own, I'll get like 4 or 5 because usually I'll have like 1 or 2 things before it, and I'm not that hungry. But what you could also do is if like you come with a few people and you all like the same things, you could just get like 2 or 3 pieces of each, you know, like get like 4 or 5 things, but get 2 or 3 pieces of each. I mean, you could even get like, you know, a few soft cheeses. You could get a few, like I said, just blue. You could get like one soft, one blue. I mean, you know, you could do whatever you want. It's just, it's kind of nice to get the variety because you can sort of try the different, you know, different variety. Tautology there, but you get my point.
Yeah. Now, I think we can now move on to some of the recipes that you've seen here.
Sure.
Is it a general, probably not a general through line with these recipes, or is it something where it's like a gone thing? Because it's an interesting thing here for me. I'm interested to see what kind of things will be going in this level of diversity you'll have in this. Because with some other places, you'll go to like more like a place like Alsace Provence area, so you can kind of expect some sorts of styles and inspirations, and occasionally there'll be some fusion type of stuff. We've talked about, we don't really like that term too much, but there'll be some inspirations being brought in from other places, but there'll be a through line with the ingredients. There'll be a through line with certain things, like we mentioned, certain Asian cuisine doesn't have cheese. So if you have like a cookbook from like a Netta, if they had a cookbook, you probably wouldn't find a lot of cheese in there. But something like this, where it's like, okay, this is a cheese store, but now we're doing with the sides and things like that. I bet there's a wide range of just different things from all over the place, and everything they list here is something they've had at the restaurant at one time or another, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like this is all because remember one of the owners is a pastry chef, so she was the one who pioneered like a lot of this stuff, and then the chefs that are there now, I think they tweak things here and there, but it's like these were the ones when they wrote this book. These were the ones that they included, and you know since then they've been coming up with new stuff too. This book was written, let me see, 2016. I mean, the place has been open for some time, but I guess this is when they finally decided let's write a book covering all this stuff. Yeah.
Hmm. So the first one they have here is herbes de Provence, so caramel corn.
Yeah, I thought this was very interesting. Again, I picked about 10 or 12 recipes that just really stood out to me. I mean, I highly, of course, recommend buying the book and checking it out yourself, but I highlighted a few recipes that I liked, hoping maybe they would resonate with certain people. So herbes de Provence, for those who don't know, it's basically herbs from Provence. Provence is the south region in France. If you ever saw French Connection, the Marseille importers, they're from Provence. Typically, it's a blend. It usually contains savory, marjoram, rosemary, thyme, oregano, and other herbs. What's interesting is that in the North American version, they actually add lavender. That's not actually a typical French thing, but we add lavender because a lot of people associate Provence with lavender fields. So I guess it's just something that we added. At Bar Balloon, it was cool. We actually had a saucisson sec. That's a saucisson is like a French salami that was actually coated in these herbs, including lavender.
Oh, wow.
I thought it was really nice. Yeah, I thought it was very nice. But for this recipe, it's basically these herbs plus caramel and popcorn, and then there's a little bit of vanilla in there, butter, all this, so it's sweeter, but then the herbs also give it an extra depth of flavor, so that goes well against the strong blue cheese. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I can see the other idea. These are not things that like, oh, we went to that region where the cheese is from and mashed it with something there. Although that is some of the thinking that's done with some kind of pairings. So it's like, oh, if this is meat from a certain place, we'll see what vegetables and plants are actually like seasonal in that place, because there's some kind of symbiotic nature of these things working together. Like if nature deigned to evolve this animal in this location, it might taste good with this plant, because even in some cases maybe that animal ate that plant to begin with. So there's some kind of thing in there that kind of works together with that. But so with these, it's at least with this one, I can see they're like, okay, so we're bringing some roquefort from France, so we have to find some herbs of Provence in France. I'm imagining that's not going to be a through line throughout this whole thing, where they're like, okay, this is paired. We're making sides with ingredients from the same location we pair the cheese with. This just happens to be on some of them, right?
Yeah, because I would also make the point that like for example, let's see, Roquefort. Roquefort is actually made in Roquefort is made in southern France as well, actually. But again, like you say, it doesn't apply to every single dish. It's more about what elements does the cheese have than what are things that would go against it. Go with, or like what are things that would complement or contrast it. And it's the same thing when you learn about wine pairings. Like what's something that tastes kind of similar that'll augment the flavor, or what's something that'll go against it but in a good way. Like my example of the chocolate with the blue, both are strong flavors, but when you put them together, they work well. Whereas, like, if you have something that, like, if you were just to have something that tastes like blue cheese with blue cheese, there's no point because they're both such
Yeah.
strong things. But then you don't want to take a mild cheese and, like they say, put Skittles with it because you're just going to taste Skittles. You're not going to taste the cheese. So you're trying to sort of find, like, it either has to complement it or contrast it in a way that's appealing. And as they say, I mean, it's it is subjective to a degree, but I think there are general guidelines that are good.
And yeah, it's caramel corn. In general, I just like regular popcorn or caramel corn. And then adding the herbs in it is an interesting twist that I personally have not had on my own. Okay, so the next one, here we go with lovely lemon saffron marshmallows. And this one is from Cana de Spain. They match it. They list here at least what they match it with. It's a pasteurized goat milk. And this is one that you mentioned that you wanted to try making, right?
Yeah, I thought it was really cool because I like saffron a bit. I think saffron, in some ways, it's a little overrated because I've known people who will try to put it in lots of stuff, and it's like there's a cool flavor, but at the same time, it's expensive because you're pulling out the stamen of those flowers, which is why it's so expensive. So saffron, like a lot of ingredients, it's one of those less is more. But I thought it was really cool to see it in a dessert format. I've had actually a saffron panna cotta. It was really nice, and I thought it was kind of cool to see this paired with lemon and meringue, which I like as well. And I thought, how does that go against cheese? Go with cheese, I should say. I thought that was really interesting. So that really caught my eye, and I was thinking, like, how could you do that with different things?
And I'm seeing here with the pasteurized goat milk. It's goat cheese. So this would be made in the more typical cylindrical kind of goat cheese that this would be paired with.
Yeah, so this type of cheese, it's it's similar to the French boucheron. It's like it's buttery, mild. It has a bloomy rind, semi-soft. So if you think boucheron, maybe I don't know if brie is the best comparison, but a little bit like that. So the flavor would sort of complement that, the lemon and the saffron both.
Okay. Yeah, I got an image shall be on the screen. Cana de cabra. Cana de cabra. Yeah, it kind of looks a bit of like a log. I like that little kind of corrugated exterior on some of these that they do with the goat cheese. They don't necessarily do that with other ones. Is there a reasoning why they normally do the goat cheese in the cylinder and more thinner, longer cylinder versus a flatter, wider one with a bigger diameter when they do like other kinds of cheeses?
I'd have to look that up. I mean, I'm sure there's some history with like the monks who made it had this device available, so they just made it that way and it became tradition, or I don't know, something.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, and then marshmallows, they'll be puffy like your typical marshmallows, right?
Yep. Yeah, so it's basically because marshmallows are basically based off meringue, so it's the egg whites that are whipped up. There's some gelatin to sort of you add gelatin to them. That's how they get chewy like that, and then the saffron just goes on top at the end. But the saffron, it's not mixed in. It would be interesting though to see marshmallows that have saffron mixed in, see if they would actually turn yellow. I think that would be kind of cool. I mean the flavor. I think if you put the saffron on directly and eat it, it'd probably be a little more potent. But I think that's the idea. Whereas I think if you were to put it in the mix, it'd be diluted. Because if you ever make saffron rice or something, you don't actually need that much saffron because it bleeds
Yeah,
out the
it's like
color of
very
the
liquid.
yellow. Yeah, so like it would change the dynamic, but it would be cool to put it in too directly just to see how it turns out. And I've had saffron ice cream as well. Yeah.
Yeah, aroma is really good. Saffron,
Yeah.
I like it. But I guess it comes from a flower. Not all flowers smell good, but yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right, so moving on to the next one. I like this, I like passion fruits. This is a passion fruit basil seed card. This is from Chèvre Fromager in Jacquin, Chèvre and Fromager Jacquin in France, and pasteurized goat milk. A lot of goat and cheese, goat and sheep. They seem to really do that a lot here instead of just sticking. I guess once you start getting to those high numbers of cheeses, you gotta throw some other. Do they have any like camel or anything else? I mean,
Not that I've seen. Not that
their
I've
mozzarella.
been.
Okay, you've been to mozzarella Mondays. Do they use buffalo mozzarella? Is it buffalo milk or is it cow's milk? Did you check?
No, I think it is cow's milk. So
Okay.
it's not like, yeah, as you're aware, the original is the water buffalo, but I know that's going to be a little pricier. And the cheese they got for that is also in the States, so I don't know what the rules are as far as raising
Regulations,
water.
yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I'm thinking. These
yeah,
bastards.
yeah.
Bastards. You can't have raw milk in New York. You probably can't have any sort of water buffalo milk.
Yeah.
But then maybe I wonder if there's a way to do buffalo mozzarella with bison or just the American buffaloes instead of using like water buffaloes from Africa.
Well, I think the concern there, Silas, might be that the fat content differs because, like, I was talking to someone about eating duck eggs versus chicken eggs, and I was saying how duck eggs are creamier. So if you had a recipe and you substituted duck eggs, that would change the thing because if a baking recipe is very exact and you have chicken eggs and you were to swap out duck eggs, that would change the whole thing because the fat content is higher, and then if you were to do a turkey egg, it'd be more protein, so it would coagulate, and like I'm sure that maybe there's someone there who could figure it out, but like you'd have to really study this and develop it. You couldn't just swap it out. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't just switch. You can't just decide to make like sometimes with baking, if you're doing vegetarian or vegan baking, you can swap out like the eggs, banana for the eggs, and still get the kind of moisture type of feel. It's definitely a different mouth feel in it. You're not going to get the same thing, but it's a good swap. But yeah, you can't do that as simply, I guess, with certain things. Yeah. Okay, so tell us about the passion fruit basil.
So this is interesting because if you ever make lemon meringue pie, this is basically the yellow that goes underneath. This is the same recipe. So it's based on egg yolks, and this is passion fruit juice and sugar. Typically, it's lemon fruit juice, sugar, eggs, all that. And the idea is you whip it up. That's how it gets that texture, and then you lay it in the pie, and then you put the meringue over top, you bake it, you hit it with the blowtorch so it gets, crispy like that. So this is the same sort of idea. You can also do lemon curd as is like this, but the passion fruit, as we've talked about, has a different flavor. So it's fresh and tart, like they say, but it kind of has like a more unique sour kind of tropical flavor. So it goes with the chef, the goat cheese, which is a little milder, but this is interesting here because they talk about how it's almost like an amuse-bouche as far as like it's brighter, so like it's a good thing to sort of wake up your palate at the start. So you could pair it with the cheese, like maybe like a little bit of this with like a cheese that's not too strong, but to wake up your palate. But then towards the end, go back to your heavier blue with the rich component. Yeah.
Yeah, and chèvre is also just French for cheese, for goat.
Goat, yeah.
Goat.
Yeah.
So, but there's this particular also like chèvre cheese. There's also a brand, right?
Yeah, well, because chèvre just means goat, but chèvre is also like a specific cheese, like an Italian pecorino means sheep, but then pecorino is also a specific cheese. Mm-hmm. So.
So there'll be images on the screen of that, and then we can jump on to the next guy here. It's passion fruit. For me, passion fruit is one of my favorite fruits. One of my favorite flowers, actually. The flower is amazing looking. The smell of it, somebody was like, oh, it's not like, I saw somebody do a post where they mentioned different kind of things and like, oh, these things don't really match the names. I was like, no, passion fruit actually does match. Like the smell of it is really intoxicating. The mouthfeel of it with all the seeds, it's kind of some sexual type of nature. There's like different kind of things. And then the flower itself is one of the most amazing looking flowers that you can just see on a regular basis. Then the vines, the way it crawls around, and I think it fits. I think passion fruit kind of fits. But yeah, okay. So the next one is a deviled egg cream. Now what's this?
I thought this was kind of interesting. You could probably tell I like a lot of sweet stuff with cheeses, but I thought this was an interesting preparation because it's basically the deviled eggs, but what it is you basically take the ingredients of the deviled eggs, but then you make it into more of like a, not puree exactly, but like kind of like a sauce, I guess you could say. So it's like the hard-boiled eggs, there's mayonnaise, mustard seed powder, onion, black pepper, a little bit of hot sauce. And it's interesting because it's a sauce that basically tastes like a deviled egg, and then you pair that with the cheese, which is a little like richer and creamier, but the spice and some of the other things sort of contrast. The creaminess of the egg goes with the cheese, but then also the spiciness and other things sort of contrast the cheese in a pleasant way.
Yeah, the cheese here is a Koenig.
Yep.
Iconic nettle from Nettle Meadow Farm in New York to the pasteurized goat and cows and goat meat. So this is they put them together to make the cheese,
Yeah.
or is it like you can have one with one? Okay. So yeah, it looks like a nice creamy kind of cheese here. I'm liking the looks of this. It looks kind of like a
Yeah,
bit like a brie.
I think we had it somewhere I worked. I'm trying to remember if it was Eddie and the Wolf or where. I mean, you figure it's from New York, so it's like a lot of places probably have it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're in the New York area, this is one of the ones where you'll be able to, yeah, all these like New York ones, if you're in America, chances are if this is some kind of, if it's a no, I guess this is another question that we had with Mark, where some places might be able to have the actual deals and things like that with restaurants, but they don't have the license to actually ship to a person. But there's lots of websites, like cheese.com is one of the websites. There's a lot of other websites where you can just get like the way they have like I know there's wine club type of things where people like sign up and you pay like what $25 a month and they send like a bottle and then you get discounts on other things. Every
Yeah, I
month
think
like a subscription type of service.
I think our friend Abraham was doing that, where if you subscribe to a certain thing, you get access to like wine that's a little bit obscure that you can't find regularly. But that's the idea: is you pay a subscription, like they'll send it to you like at a discount. But like overall, it's like, but that's the idea is to get you to keep spending money. That's why you get the discount. So.
I know they have those for cheese. Like one of my friends was saying that she was doing a cheese one for some time. I don't know if she's still doing it, but yeah, they do have those for cheese too. They just like once a month, they just get like a magic. It's like a bag of just cheese comes, like a shipment of cheese. This comes and they surprise you with different kind of cheese, but then you get discounts. So y'all cheese lovers out there can definitely look into that. Yeah, you got Christmas coming around. Yeah, maybe get a good Christmas gift for some people. All right, so now moving on to the next one here, we have some red wine shallots, and this is ameribella, the Jacobs and Bridgewood Farmstead cheese from Indiana, and it's a raw cow's milk one.
Yeah, so the red wine shallots are interesting because those have been included in a number of places that I worked at. Barbaloo, we served them with charcuterie. There was a beef cheek terrine. Maybe I could find a picture for it of it for you. It was like a beef cheek terrine. I think there were pistachios in it, and this actually went on top as an accompaniment. If you remember in the Minetta Tavern video, we actually had their red wine shallots with the bone marrow. And then here it pairs with a cheese. So it's one of those items that I think is versatile enough that it pairs well with meat, cheeses, and other things. Because the shallots are kind of sweet. Red wine, of course, has its flavor. Here they add a little bit of sugar, I think. Let me see. Here they actually had sugar at Barbaloo. We actually cooked it with red wine and port. So port is a sweeter wine, so it takes on those flavor. They put rosemary in there. We used to do like thyme and bay leaf. Yeah, well, there's bay leaf in here too. It's a very nice accompaniment. I think it works well with a lot of things. I mean, you could even serve it, like I say, you could do it with like the beef cheek terrine. You could do it with like a chicken liver mousse. You could do it with the bone marrow. You could do it with these cheeses. Like it's really cool how it works well with a lot of different things. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, with this cheese, this is I don't know if it's I want to say like a Tilson or I've seen gorgonzola in different kinds of I've seen crumbly gorgonzola, but I've seen also very creamy where it's almost just a liquid type of version of gorgonzola. And I'm seeing the same thing here with Maribella, where there's some that look a little bit more solid, but still not like super hard. But then there's some that where it just looks like cream, where it's just like toothpaste almost type of consistency. Yeah, it's a stinky cheese, right? It's a stinky cheese.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, you must say, no, but yeah, stinky cheese, but yeah, Ameribella. Looks like it would be a long, strong flavor. The rind looks a bit like a Tilson, like orangish type of rind.
Yeah, washed rind cheese. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the red wine shallots. Now we shall go to the next one. It's another good thing, another good find from Italy. The time in Italy was blood oranges, and this is a blood orange fennel chip, which is Red Hawk, with Red Hawk cheese from Cowgirl Creamery in California, and it's a pasteurized cow's milk one. And yeah, blood orange is one of those things where you can find them in America now. Even here in Nairobi, sometimes you'll find them, but it's something hard to explain how. Like a blood orange is essentially what your mind is faking pink lemonade to taste like, sort of.
Yeah.
Where it's like the real thing. Pink lemonade, even in some cases, is not even. Sometimes pink lemonade is just lemonade with some red food coloring in it. Sometimes they add like some elderberry juice or some kind of flavoring to kind of do some different kind of taste to it. but it's mostly just. And once you find that out, it's just the tricks that your mind can do to yourself. Where literally, if you had that pink lemonade without the food coloring, it would just taste like lemonade. But because it's pink, your mind does some tricks on you. But blood orange is amazeballs. There's something just really, it's really fantastic thing about blood orange, arancia rosa. It's great. Yeah. Okay, so tell us about this fennel chip.
Yeah, well, it's interesting here because they say too, right here that how this is one of their favorite accompaniments because of the appearance. And if you look at the recipe, I mean, it looks beautiful as you say. I mean, it's like that reddish color with the fennel sprinkled on top. But like they say, I mean, it's actually fairly simple. I mean, it's just mandolins cut. You get a mandolin or a deli slicer, and you actually cut oranges super thin. Make sure the blade is razor sharp. That's how they hold the shape. And then you put them in with sugar basically, and then you can either I think here they bake them in the oven, but you could also use a dehydrator. That's the other way you could do it. And then just sprinkle some fennel on at the end. It's like I said, it's a pretty simple dish, and but it looks really nice, and the flavor once it gets concentrated with the sugar and everything, I'm sure it tastes great with the cheese. I was just thinking you could do this with other fruit too, like Meyer lemon. If you're familiar, I like Meyer lemon a lot. Like do like a Meyer lemon chip, maybe like do a different seed on top. Like you could definitely play around. You could do. I mean, I was gonna say you could do kumquat, but they're really small, so it'd be kind of annoying slicing all those. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but it'd be a lot of work. You could do something with grapefruit, although you'd probably have to trim it down because the slices would be huge. You could do different things. You could do different things. That would be fun.
Yeah, you can do like halves and stuff like that. I mean, you can even do like. Yeah, you can even if depending on the cheese. Let me see. So the Red Hawk cheese. Let's see if we can get some image of this. Um, Depending on the cheese, I think you can do some. It depends on how thick these. No, the slices are super thin, but maybe you can just put a bit of cheese on top of it. Red Hawk cheese. Um, yeah, okay. So Red Hawk cheese. Yeah, this is also a bit. Looks like a bit of a softer one. Definitely not as soft as ameribella. Looks like here, with the can be aged to the point where actually the rind starts creeping in, where it actually almost has two different consistencies in the cheeses that I'm seeing here that you get. But yeah, it looks like a smaller kind of wheel that they make here with this one. So it's slightly soft. So I can see you can also slide some, like, and then put this a bit on top of them and eat them kind of like just like almost like it's a cracker or something. So that could be something you can do with that. Yeah. So yeah, interesting. The Red Hawk.
I've had those citrus chips on desserts as well. Like I've had like I'm trying to remember if it was blood orange or something dried out and just put on top of a dessert. Like it'll go with like a cream or something. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, and you can see with the veins or the things, and it almost looks like capillaries, like in a cross section of some like internal organ or something. But yeah, blood orange tarantulas is the main balls. Okay, so moving on to the next one. I keep saying I'm going to make rhubarb pie, but never do. Okay, so pink pepper pickled rhubarb, and this goes with a barbaloo from Italy, and it's a pasteurized goat's milk.
So I should have put this next one first, but if you scroll down a bit, there's a cheese plate. It says seasonality. There's actually 3 different rhubarb recipes they have here, and I thought that was very interesting. And there's a section here about seasonality, and they basically um, talk about some of the stuff that I mentioned in previous videos, how they like to do seasonal stuff because that's kind of like a throwback to the days when like we couldn't get whatever we wanted, so people had to make pickled jams, preserves, or whatever. So if you notice here with these 3 rhubarb preparations, there's a pickle, there's a jelly, and then there's rose rhubarb. So the idea is like rose rhubarb you'd probably do in spring, and then the pickled rhubarb or the jelly you would do maybe like fall or winter when rhubarb's out of season. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then they talk here, let me see. And then they talk about, of course, the flavors, of course. The flavors of the cheeses too are even affected by what the animals eat, which will change season by season too. Because you think about it, like animals during the warm weather sitting outside eating grass, during cooler time they have to be in the barn and they have to eat like hay or something else. Yeah, so then they either get like grain, hay, or something else that changes the flavor of the milk and also the fat content. We talked a bit about that with Mark. So then they talk a little bit about this here too. So I thought it was kind of cool. They just focused on one ingredient, rhubarb, and sort of did 3 different condiments with it. And I picked this one in particular, the pink pepper pickled rhubarb because I like rhubarb. Pickled stuff is interesting, I thought, with the pink peppercorns, which I like. And they also use tarragon vinegar and rice vinegar, which is kind of interesting. I like tarragon a lot as well. So you get some different flavors there, because if you have rhubarb straight, it doesn't taste like a whole lot. Like, you have to douse it in sugar and pair it with something else.
Yeah.
But I thought it was cool how they so you get the rhubarb, you get some of the vinegar, you get the flavor of rice vinegar, you get the flavor of the bay leaf, and then the pink peppercorns have their own flavor. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and it's cool, the presentation here with the sliced up pieces, then the bigger pieces with the pink peppercorns on top. Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't it? Rhubarb is an interesting sort of thing.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, can you switch with like celery? What if you use like celery for the same kind of rhubarb preparations? Oh,
I mean, you
celery
could.
has its own strong taste.
It would definitely taste different, but you could.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think of what else you could do with it. Some stalks, like some Swiss chard, depending on the strain that you have, can have some rather thick stalk. There's probably things you can find to kind of substitute that in.
It would just change the flavor profile, because, like I say,
Yeah.
rhubarb versus. So, like, if you do, I've had pickled celery before. I'm trying to think of what it was with, but I think it was cut up into like slices. Like, if you slice along the stalk, widthwise, I think that's how it was shaped, if I recall. Trying to remember what that was on, though.
And this is something that you being in the food industry, and those of y'all out there who've been to restaurants, you'll see that not too many restaurants will have any sort of thing and just do one thing with it, unless it's a very specialized sort of meal or ingredient. You'll normally find it's beneficial to have at least each ingredient in at least like 3 different kind of preparations, 3 different kinds of dishes that you can do with it, just out of just the economic sense of just, if you're going to purchase something, you might as well be using it in different ways, or at least like different parts of something. If you get something, maybe using the stalk for something and using the leaves themselves for something, or that kind of thing.
Not with rhubarb, though. Rhubarb leaves are poisonous. So,
yeah,
yeah.
so definitely not rhubarb, but in some cases you can do that kind of thing with it. I'm trying to think, like, what was
Well, like you say, Swiss chard. I mean, you typically cut up the leaves. Well, at Barbaloo, you'd cut up the leaves, then you would saute the leaves, and the stalk you'd cut into pieces and saute that. And, like, sometimes it'd go on the same plate, but, like, the rainbow chard, you would have, like, the colored pieces sort of sit on the plate, then you'd have the leaves, like, in like a little pile, almost like sauteed spinach or something.
Yeah, one thing I do here in Kenya, they do. I don't know why they do this, but they call Swiss chard spinach here. I don't know why, it bugs me. But one thing that some people don't do is when you're making something like parsley or cilantro or these kind of herbs with the smaller kind of stalks and things like that, I normally just chop it. Like, if I'm doing like a salad, I'll just use the leaves alone. But if I'm doing like a stew or things like that, I'll chop up even the stalk, because the stems and the stalks have a lot of flavor into it. Like, let's say I'm doing like a stew or something with like meats or something, like I'm frying up some meats or something. I'll chop up the stalks separately, and then I'll put that in early when the stalk is still boiling and the soup is boiling. And then you don't want to put the leaves in too early, because if you put the leaves in early, they'll malt. The color goes out and they lose their consistency. So with the leaves, in some cases, I even just sprinkle the leaves raw on top. Let's say I'm doing like a pasta or something, I don't put those in until the end. But if I'm doing like a pasta and I know there's going to be some cilantro or something like that in the actual, with the meat or the things on the side, I can also put in the actual stalks of it in the actual water that's boiling the actual pasta in it, so some flavor gets into it. Just don't throw the stalks away. This is my little pro tip, or chefing up, like amateur chefing it up tip for those who are using herbs and things like that.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So you can jump down to the cardamom, right?
Yep.
So here on the cardamom poached, I couldn't find any Barbaloo. There's a restaurant called Barbaloo, so I couldn't find any Barbaloo cheese. But if I look for that more, I might find it and post images. Okay, so the next one is cardamom poached butternut squash. And it was Rosso de Langa from Altalanga in Italy, and pasteurized cows and sheep's milks.
Yeah, so this one caught my eye because I think the time of year, fall butternut squash, it's kind of fitting. And I think you and I have discussed a bit how I've said how cardamom, I think, is kind of an underrated, underused item. So I thought it was cool how they sort of paired that, plus lemon, vanilla, sugar, salt, so a lot of flavors going on there. And it looks really nice too. There's pictures here, sort of the half moon shapes with the cardamom seeds throughout. Cardamom seeds are not they're not pleasant to bite into, though. I mean, a lot of places will even break cardamom. Some places will even break them open and just use the seeds because like the pod isn't pleasant. So what it is here is they roast them with the pods, but you can't eat the pods. So alternatively, I guess what you could do is roast squash and then like put the seeds on like partway through or after. You could do that too if you want to eat them directly. But I think they absorb enough flavor during roasting, so it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're not like the seeds are not flush to the pods. It's like,
Yeah.
if I remember, they kind of roll around a bit, so it's kind of a shell, and yeah, it's not the most pleasant thing, but the flavor is good. And yeah,
Definitely.
the rosso de langa cheese looks like another softer cheese. Maybe it's, I guess most of the, no, this harder sheep's cheese. We saw some hard ones in the different preparation to it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the cheese itself. Yeah.
yeah, I don't think I mean, I probably saw it sometimes, like when I was living in Italy for a couple of years, like when you go to the market, you just walk around like natural fresh food markets, and tons and tons of cheeses, look at the names in different places. And, some of the people know the stuff, but then it takes some time to get to know where all these things are coming from, because that's something there. Like, some of the stuff is super genuine. It's like really coming from different places, where when you go to a place and you see like this guy with like a small one person stall, like a small, like 5 foot by 5 foot stall, but it's like 50 different kind of cheeses in this display. It's kind of, it's part of the charm of the Italian life. But yeah. Okay. So, I think you can do this, the butternut squash. And now you can switch the butternut squash out for different kinds of gourds and things like that in this. Now I'm wondering,
you could do delicata squash. Delicata squash is nice. You're familiar with that one? That's the one with the stripes on the outside. That looks kind of cool because it has the stripes on the outside, which you can serve on the plate. So you'll actually see it on the plate, like with the stripes.
let me see a picture and see if I've. Yeah, okay, I've seen these
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, those are nice. Similar in flavor to the butternut. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the squash. Yeah, interesting. Now I'm wondering, now can you do? I wonder if you can use like melons and stuff like that. I don't know.
I mean,
Okay.
roasting, I don't know. I mean, you could, but you could do melons maybe with maybe like lightly cooked with cardamom or something, but you'd probably have to
Yeah.
prepare it differently because roasting it, I don't know how that would turn out. Yeah.
Like flambe, where you like use some flames, like sear the exterior.
Well,
But then
you could even
the flavor
maybe
transfer wouldn't be there.
you could maybe cook it like lightly in simple syrup or something with like the cardamom in it so it absorbs some of those flavors. Pull it out, maybe something like that.
Yeah. All right. So on to the next one. We got some anise marine, which is barely buzzed, which is a beehive cheese company from Utah, and pasteurized cow milk. So let's see what this barely buzzed looks like.
Yeah, so then this here I thought was interesting. I actually like anise and licorice flavored stuff a lot. It's kind of funny. I know a lot of people who don't. I guess I grew up because like I had a grandfather who like loved licorice and they'd always have like anise candies and stuff. Um, Maybe that rubbed off on me. I don't know. But I thought this was interesting here. The anise seed in the meringue itself. So you take on that flavor. This actually strikes me as something that's good around Christmas time. I thought it was cool, especially like some of like the German cookies and stuff have this. I like the description here. We have to give a shout out to Ray and Edward because they talk about Mormons that don't drink coffee or alcohol. So
Yeah.
they rub their cheese with espresso and lavender, call it barely buzzed. So that's kind of interesting. So the coffee goes with the meringue, like coffee, egg whites. You think about anisette and coffee. So if the cheese takes on some coffee flavors or at least elements that goes with anise. So, and then lemon,
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting. Yeah.
The cheese itself looks a bit like, so, we want to, like, this is the hardest cheese of these other ones I think we've seen in the recipe book.
Yeah.
Almost looks like a black Danbo, but I'm just saying that more because of the rind being black.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, what's the rind color? What decides rind color? Do you know?
I think it depends on what it's aged in, how long it's aged, like whatever bacteria is cultivated. Then of course that affects the hardness or softness of it too. Things like that. Because like we mentioned, there's that cheese with the chestnut bourbon leaves. Their cheese is I'm trying to think of some of the other items. I'm thinking some of the other cheeses, like what they're covered in. I've seen cheeses wrapped in other leaves too, to sort of impart their flavors. Yeah.
Okay, so we're here with microbialfoods.org. How cheese rinds get their color. Try to remember to save this. So let me save the link here to make sure that we post it with it so y'all can check that out when you get to it. And let's see what they say. Um, They say here that when it comes to giving credit for those pungent orange reds, most people cite the bacterium B. linens, formerly Bacterium linens. But recent research suggests that B. linens may be getting way too much credit for the cheese rind color. Numerous other bacteria and fungi can create distinct pigments on the rinds of cheeses. My own experience isolating microbes from cheese rinds and other published research suggests that some highly pigmented rinds have very little B. linens present. For example, if washed in a washed rind cheese from California, a typical orange-colored surface, we didn't detect bacterium, but in most of the bacteria found weren't added to the cheese in street culture. So yeah, you can check it out for more details and different kind of things that go into there. That's the kind of life that we live. If you've got a question, just type it into a search engine, and somebody shall provide that information, or you can be out there to provide it and let the other people know.
Instead of nagging people 100 times what things mean.
I mean, I'll let people. I don't know. I know we kind of we've talked about this before. I would say it's a bit of a thing for us, but it's a bit of a bugaboo, is a thing. But yeah, it's taken some time to realize, and it's. I remember even old enough to remember the times before when smartphones were coming in. People were like, look at these little kids out dating and everybody sitting on their phone. And I'm like, yeah, are they really? Like, I've been in a situation where I'd go out with people, we'd be talking, and then the conversation would end on a topic that people don't know about. But if you have your handheld computers, you can just go on and find the answer for that. And once you find the answer for that, that conversation might increase and go to other places that would have, or it branches out since that's done, and your mind isn't like processing what is this thing, what is this thing, what is this thing.
Yeah,
it's a tool. It's the way you use it. So for me, I've used it to open up information. So it's taken some time for me to get to the point where I'm like, okay, do that. But then with that, also I have these conversations with Stephen where it's like I could try to find this information on my own, but having this conversation with Stephen and adding that to the tool of the internet that we have is a force multiplier. It's a conversation multiplier. The quality of the people that you're with is going to define the thing anyway. If you go on like a weekend, you're like, we're going to leave our phones in the car and go out in the woods. Even if you're with crappy people that you would be sitting on your phones if you were in a restaurant, it's not like being out in the woods, all of a sudden you'd want to talk to them more. They'd still be crappy people. Okay, so I think on to the last one here.
Yep.
There's a lot of, all over the place, good things and good flavors and good things being done in this cookbook.
Sure.
So now you have a kiwi mostrada, and this is Ewe's Blue with old Chatham sheep herding company in New York, and it's pasteurized sheep milks.
Sure. So this I thought was very interesting because it's funny. I actually like kiwi, but I don't eat it that regularly. But I thought this was an interesting pairing here: ripe kiwi with sugar, orange juice, wine, and mustard powder. Because mostarda, of course, means mustard. So I thought that was interesting because it's tart, sweet, and spicy, and that is supposed to go against the contrast of the heavier blue cheese. So I just thought that was a very interesting just like an interesting series of items all going together, which I've actually never seen. I mean, I've had like, I'm trying to think of what other mostarda. Like I've had like grape mostarda, but I've never had it with kiwi. So I thought that was kind of cool. And this is another Ewe's Blue, like another sheep's cheese. It says here that this one is bright and fruitier. So I guess maybe it's probably not like as intense as say the Stilton, but it's probably still in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing here with iGourmet, it's being some kind of like artisanal bread, like some pumpernickel, and it looks like some dried figs and some persimmon being served with it. But yeah, it's looks to be a bit smaller of a wheel of the cheese being made with this, and that's weird. Yeah, so from New York City. So again, this is another one where you can probably get delivered to y'all wherever you may be. And as Stephen mentioned, the Mostrada, you can do different things with the same kind of preparation, the same kind of recipe that they have here for this. Yeah. Wait. I feel like no, that wasn't on. Or was that on the? I feel like I saw something like that. Okay, so none of these was the Mostrada in a different plating that you've had before? Have you had any? None of these you had, right?
No, I haven't had any of these. There was another. Was it a beet mostarda? I'm trying to remember now. I had another I had something most. Oh, with pineapple mostarda. That's what it was. That was on
Okay.
one of the cheese plates that we're going to cover in the other presentation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I felt like I saw something similar to this somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's it for it. Like I know we were doing this one and we were thinking, okay, we'll do this as we're recording the other one in
Yeah.
parts. And it was just like a short guy throw this up, but it's even kind of longer than the average length of the ones that we do. So it's a different kind of it's a different sort of structure that we've done before, because before it
Yeah.
was the actual things that he's had before, and so we just talked about one plate and into the recipe
Yeah.
book. But I think this is something now we've tested this out. We'll start compiling more recipe books, and we'll start talking cookbooks. I'm not calling them recipe books. We'll start talking about more cookbooks, and we'll start doing those in this kind of breakdown way, kind of discussing the different things and trying to find images and things like that to go with it. And then
Nope.
soon we'll start actually making some of these dishes too.
And let me point out here too, we only covered, about 10 or so condiments. There's actually 66 condiment recipes in here. So
Yeah.
it's like there's a lot more. I just wanted to highlight some that really caught my eye. And there's also there's a glossary where they like recommend what they pair with and why. Like this is fruitier, this cheese is stronger, so it goes with this, all this. I highly recommend everyone buy the book. You can get it on Amazon as well. I think you can also get it as an ebook if you don't want the physical book. I'd rather have the physical copy. But I highly recommend everyone go out buy the book, and I mean, hopefully you'll get some inspiration from this. And as we're discussing throughout this conversation, I mean, you could even take some of these recipes, tweak them, improve on them,
Mhm.
alter them. I mean, have your own party, make cheese, have some, your own version of these condiments, or make something else altogether. I mean, who knows? Oh.
Yeah, and Stephen did find some other cookbooks while he was going through his helping clean out his grandparents' home. So I think that's what we'll do with these. In the structure of these, when we're doing a cookbook, we'll try to limit it to 10 different kind of dishes from whichever cookbook we're discussing. And maybe if it's from a place that he's been to or that we've been, we'll throw in another dish on there. But we've also tested out the whole talking about just one dish, so we'll do both of those. So there'll be more content covering this one. As he's mentioned, we're recording a different one for this. We're recording a different one for Castello. So that one will probably come a bit later after we've recorded other ones, because we have different people now coming on wanting to talk on that, and the separate project that we're working on with with the I Know Great people also working on that. We mentioned someone in Cairo who was talking about the Houda, so we'll have that one coming up, where we have other people listed for that. And then we have a separate conversation series going back to more socio-political type of conversation and things that we have. And we mentioned husbandry, animal husbandry here. And the next conversation we're lining up is a few-part series on marriage and relationships and things like that. And then, yeah, so just more stuff coming from this thing. Still personally working on getting a podcast version of this. And once there's a podcast version, I think just for simplicity's sake, I'm not going to be able to manage many different locations. It'll be on one location, just like you have this one place where you listen to this now. So there'll be one website where you can find all that stuff, all the podcasts in different parts. If you just like the food one, you could wait for the weekly one, but you can also try and test the other things with other conversations you have with other people participating in that. So anything else you have to say about Castello and his book?
Not really. Again, I mean, I highly recommend everyone get the book. I'd be curious to see what people come up with. I was also thinking we could do another one. We could do is I don't know if you're familiar with the Redwall series. If you ever read that as a kid, I used to love that when I was little. It's the one with the anthropomorphic animals, but it's in a medieval setting, and you have the good versus the evil animals. The good animals are mice, hares, moles, what else? Badgers, things like that. The evil animals were rats, stoats, ferrets, foxes, weasels, all that. And basically, the stories were basically things that went on in sort of their universe, and the different conflicts and battles and all this. Anyway, one sec. A few years ago, my sister was nice enough to get me this cookbook. This is the Redwall cookbook here. It's pretty cool, and they actually have recipes. So it's a lot of old school English stuff. There's a root vegetable pie. There's a blackberry and apple cake. There's a scone recipe. I thought this would be interesting to cover too. And it's interesting here because they talk a little bit about where in the books these recipes are mentioned and why. And then it's even broken up by season. So it's these are the autumn recipes, these are the spring. I think it's pretty cool. That could be something to cover too. Yeah.
So that'll be something that we got a few things listed up. So there's things coming, and I don't know. I ain't got much else to say after this. So
no. No, we have more castello to cover and with our bigger presentation. So
Yeah. So with that one, as you mentioned, so check that one out because we go more into the history of the restaurant and talks about that. Then also get a different point of view from Andrea, telling us some of her stories and her experiences with the food from there. And yeah, right now I'm good to end with this conversation, get my Inktober drawing up and get that posted up. But yeah.
Sure.
Guys, gals, and everyone else in between, thank you all for listening as usual. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing your time and knowledge. That's it for me. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Almond butter and apple butter and almond crunch.
Sure.
Eureka, sheep's milk from Central Coast Creamery with some carrot and cumin puree and edible cornflower. Finger Lakes goat's milk cheese with some cashew brittle.
Sure.
We have your canestrato, Italian sheep's milk crushed cheese with oven roasted tomato.
Nice.
This one is on us. It's a zimbro. You're welcome. It's zimbro. It's a sheep's milk well strained from Portugal. It's a fruity, funky with pickled beet and beet dust. And then to finish, your stilton from England with a chocolate-guinness ganache.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Enjoy.